The old piano keys felt like home under Maya Jefferson's fingertips. She sat on the wobbly bench in her grandmother's tiny apartment, her back straight and her head tilted slightly as she listened to every note she played. The upright piano had seen better days. Some keys stuck when pressed, and the wood was scratched and faded, but to Maya, it was perfect. Her fingers moved across the keys with the confidence of someone who had memorized every sound, every feeling of each note. She didn't need to see the piano to know exactly where her hands should go. Music was her language, and this old instrument was her voice. "Play that part again, baby," called her grandmother Ruby from the kitchen. The smell of cornbread filled the small apartment. "The part where your left hand does that beautiful run." Maya smiled and repeated the section. Her left hand danced down the lower keys while her right hand carried the melody. She had been working on this piece for weeks. Preparing for something that seemed impossible just a few months ago, Ruby walked into the living room, wiping her hands on her apron. She was a small woman with gray hair pulled back in a neat bun and eyes that sparkled when she talked about music. "That's it right there. You hear how the bass line talks to the melody, like they're having a conversation." "I can feel it," Maya sighed, not stopping her playing. "It's like the low notes are asking questions and the high notes are giving answers." Ruby nodded and sat down in her favorite chair. She watched her granddaughter play with pride filling her chest. Maya had been living with her since she was 8 years old, after her parents died in a car accident. Ruby had been the church organist for 40 years before her arthritis made it too difficult to play. When Maya came to live with her, Ruby discovered that the little girl had an extraordinary gift. Maya had been born blind, but she heard music in everything. The rhythm of rain on the window, the melody in people's voices, the harmony in everyday sounds that most people never noticed. When Ruby first sat Maya down at the piano, the child's tiny fingers found the keys like they were meant to be there. "Remember when you were 10 and could barely reach the pedals?" Ruby laughed softly. "Now look at you. 17 years old and playing like you've been doing this for 50 years. Maya paused her playing and turned toward her grandmother's voice. "Do you really think I'm good enough, Grandma Ruby?" "Good enough for what, honey? You know what I mean." Maya's voice became quiet. "The conservatory. Do you really think someone like me belongs there?" Ruby stood up and walked over to the piano bench. She sat down next to Maya and took her granddaughter's hands in her own weathered ones. "Listen to me, Maya Jefferson. I've been around music my whole life. I've heard talented people, skilled people, and even some famous people, but what you have is different. You don't just play music, you live it, you breathe it. When you sit at this piano, you speak directly to people's hearts." Maya felt tears forming in her eyes. "But Grandma, what if they don't see it that way? What if they just see a blind girl who doesn't belong?" "Then they're fools," Ruby said firmly, "and their loss will be someone else's gain." "But I don't think that's going to happen. I think you're going to show them something they've never seen before." Maya nodded and wiped her eyes. She turned back to the piano and started playing again, this time choosing a song her grandmother had taught her years ago. It was an old gospel hymn that Ruby used to play in church. Maya's version was different, though. She added her own touches, her own style, blending the traditional with something new and personal. The apartment was small, just 2 bedrooms, a kitchen, and this living room that doubled as Maya's practice space. They didn't have much money. Ruby's pension from her years as a church organist was small, and Maya couldn't work traditional jobs that other teenagers had, but they made it work. Ruby had sold her car last year to pay for Maya's piano lessons with Mrs. Chun, the only teacher in their neighborhood who was willing to work with a blind student. "You know what day it is today?" Ruby asked suddenly. Maya's hands stopped moving across the keys. "Thursday?" "It's March 15th. Exactly 3 months since you sent that recording to Hartwell Conservatory." Maya's heart started beating faster. She had almost forgotten, but not really. How could she forget? 3 months ago, she had recorded herself playing 3 pieces on this old piano. Mrs. Chun had helped her make the recording with her phone, and Ruby had helped her mail it along with her application. Hartwell Conservatory was one of the most famous music schools in the country. Students came from all over the world to study there. The tuition cost more money than Maya and Ruby would see in 5 years. But they had a scholarship program, and Mrs. Chun had insisted that Maya apply. They said they'd send responses by mid-March, Maya said quietly. That's right. And what's today? Before Maya could answer, there was a knock at the door. Both women looked toward the sound. That's probably Mrs. Williams from next door, Ruby said, starting to get up. Wait, Maya said, grabbing her grandmother's arm. Listen. They sat quietly, then they heard it. The mail slot in the front door opened and closed with a metallic click. Someone had just delivered mail. Ruby and Maya looked at each other. Mail. Usually came in the morning, and it was already late afternoon. It might be nothing, Ruby said, but her voice had a nervous excitement to it. Or it might be something, Maya whispered. Ruby walked to the front door. Maya heard her footsteps, then heard her grandmother pick up something from the floor. There was a long pause. Grandma? Maya called. What is it? Ruby walked back into the living room, holding a thick envelope. Her hands were shaking slightly. It's from Hartwell Conservatory, Ruby said. Her voice was barely above a whisper. Maya stood up from the piano bench so quickly that she almost knocked it over. Is it thick or thin? It's thick, baby, really thick. They both knew what that meant. Thin envelopes usually contained rejection letters. Thick envelopes meant acceptance letters with lots of information about enrollment. Open it, Maya said, her voice trembling. Please, Grandma. I can't wait any longer. Ruby's hands shook as she opened the envelope. Maya heard the paper tearing, then rustling as her grandmother unfolded the letter. There was a long silence. Grandma? Ruby cleared her throat and began to read. Dear Miss Jefferson, we are pleased to inform you that you have been accepted into the Hartwell Conservatory Piano Performance Program. Maya gasped and covered her mouth with her hands. Ruby continued reading, her voice getting stronger with each word. Furthermore, based on the exceptional quality of your audition recording, you have been awarded a full scholarship covering tuition, room, and board for 4 years. The envelope slipped from Ruby's hands and fell to the floor as both women started. Crying, Maya reached out and found her grandmother, and they hugged each other tightly. We did it, Grandma, Maya sobbed. We actually did it. No, baby, Ruby said, holding her granddaughter close. You did it, you and that beautiful gift God gave you. As they held each other in that small apartment with the old piano sitting silently behind them, Maya felt like her whole life was about to change. She was going to Hartwell Conservatory. She was going to study music at one of the best schools in the world. She had no idea what challenges were waiting for her there. The taxi pulled up to the front gates of Hartwell Conservatory, and Maya felt her stomach flip with nervous excitement. She had imagined this moment for months, but nothing could have prepared her for the reality. Even through the car window, she could hear the grandness of the place. Fountains splashed somewhere in the distance, and the sounds echoed off what must have been massive stone buildings. Here we are, miss, the driver said kindly. Want me to help you with your bags? Thank you, Maya said, gripping her white cane tightly. That would be wonderful. As she stepped out of the taxi, the first thing that hit her was the smell. Clean air mixed with old stone and the faint scent of expensive flowers. This was nothing like her grandmother's neighborhood. Everything here seemed bigger, grander, more important. The driver set her 2 suitcases down beside her. Maya had packed everything she owned, which wasn't much. Most of her space was taken up by sheet music that Ruby had collected over the years, written in Braille. Good luck in there, the driver said before getting back in his car. Maya stood alone at the entrance of Hartwell Conservatory, listening to the sounds around her. She could hear other students talking and laughing as they passed by. Some were wheeling expensive-looking instrument cases. Others were speaking in languages she didn't recognize. The sound of a violin drifted from an open window somewhere above. She took a deep breath and started walking toward what she hoped was the main entrance. Her cane tapped against smooth stone pavement, then hit steps. She counted 7 steps up to what felt like massive wooden doors. Excuse me, she said, to someone who was walking nearby. Could you help me find the main office? There was a pause before a young man answered. Oh, sure. It's straight through those doors and then to the right. You can't miss it, Maya thanked him and made her way inside. The moment she stepped through the doors, she was overwhelmed by the acoustics of the place. Every sound echoed beautifully. Her footsteps, her cane tapping, even the rustle of her clothes seemed to bounce off high ceilings and marble walls. She could hear conversations happening all around her, but as she passed by, she noticed something strange. The talking would stop as she approached, then start again after she passed. Whispers followed her down the hallway. Is that the scholarship girl? I heard she's blind. How is she supposed to study here? Maya tried to ignore the comments, but each one felt like a small punch to her confidence. She had expected this, but that didn't make it easier to hear. Finally, she found the main office. The secretary, Mrs. Patterson, was warm and helpful. She gave Maya her room key, class schedule, and a campus map written in Braille. Your roommate is Olivia Shun, Mrs. Patterson explained. She's a second-year student, very sweet. She volunteered to help new students get settled. Chun? Maya asked. Any relation to Mrs. Chun, who teaches piano in my neighborhood? Oh, you know Angela Chun? That's Olivia's aunt. What a small world. Olivia will be so excited to meet you. Maya felt a wave of relief. At least she would have one friendly face in this intimidating place. Mrs. Patterson walked with Maya to her dormitory building. Now, I need to let you know about your practice room assignment, she said as they walked. Due to space limitations, you've been assigned to practice room B12. B12? Maya asked. It's in the basement level. I know, it's not ideal, but it's what we have available right now. Maya nodded, trying not to let her disappointment show. She had heard that practice rooms were assigned based on seniority and status. Clearly, scholarship students got whatever was left over. Her dorm room was on the third floor. Maya's new roommate, Olivia, was waiting for her when she arrived. Unlike the other students Maya had encountered, Olivia seemed genuinely happy to meet her. Maya, I'm so excited you're here, Olivia said warmly. My aunt told me so much about you. She said you're incredibly talented. She's very kind, Maya said. Feeling some of her nervousness fade away, Olivia helped Maya unpack and showed her around the room. I saved the bed by the window for you, she said. I know you can't see the view, but it gets nice light in the morning, and you can hear the music from the practice rooms below. That evening, Olivia took Maya on a tour of the campus. The conservatory was like a small city with multiple buildings connected by covered walkways. There was the main performance hall, which seated over 1,000 people. The library had the largest collection of musical scores on the East Coast. The practice building had 5 floors of individual practice rooms, each equipped with a grand piano. The best practice rooms are on the 4th and 5th floors, Olivia explained as they walked. They have the newest pianos and the best acoustics. The basement rooms are mostly for storage, but they use them for overflow when things get crowded. Maya tried not to feel bitter about her room assignment, but it was hard. She was here on a full scholarship, the same as students who were getting the premium practice spaces. The next morning was Maya's first master class. These were small group sessions where students performed for each other and received feedback from professors. Maya had been placed in Professor Williams' intermediate class. She arrived early, wanting to familiarize herself with the room before other students got there. The classroom had several grand pianos arranged in a circle. Maya found an empty chair and sat down, running her fingers over her sheet music one more time. Other students began filtering in. Maya could hear them greeting each other, talking about their summer vacations and what pieces they were working on. She tried to join the conversation a few times, but the responses were polite but distant. I spent the summer at the festival in Austria, one girl was saying. The master classes there were incredible. Lucky, said another student. I was stuck doing regional competitions, though I did win first place in the state championship. Maya wanted to mention that she had won her state competition too, but the conversation moved on before she could find an opening. Professor Williams entered the room with a stern expression. He was an older man with gray hair and the kind of presence that made everyone sit up straighter. Good morning, everyone. For those who don't know me, I'm Professor Williams. I've been teaching here for 25 years and I have very high standards. This is not your high school music class. This is professional training. He looked around the room, his eyes stopping on Maya for just a moment longer than the others. We'll start with performances today. I want to hear what level you're all at. He consulted his list. Miss Jefferson, you're first. Maya felt every pair of eyes in the room turn toward her. She stood up carefully, using her cane to navigate to the piano. Behind her, she heard a student whisper to another, "This should be interesting." She sat down at the bench and adjusted her position. The piano was beautiful, much nicer than anything she had ever played. She placed her hands on the keys and took a deep breath. For a moment, all her nervousness disappeared. This was what she did. This was who she was. The music flowed from her fingers like water, filling the room with a melody that spoke of longing and hope. When she finished, there was silence. Maya turned toward where she thought Professor Williams was sitting, waiting for his feedback. Technically adequate, he said finally. But I'm concerned about your ability to keep up with the visual aspects of performance. How do you plan to follow a conductor? How will you manage page turns during longer pieces? Maya felt her cheeks burn. I've memorized all my pieces, sir. And I've worked with conductors before. I can follow audio cues and we'll see, Professor. Williams cut her off. Next student. As Maya made her way back to her seat, she heard more whispers. How is she going to survive here? I feel bad for her, but this isn't really fair to the rest of us. Maybe they have different standards for scholarship students. Maya sat down and tried to focus on the other performances, but the comments kept echoing in her head. She had expected challenges, but she hadn't expected to feel so alone. Even in a room full of musicians, people who supposedly understood the language she spoke fluently, she felt like an outsider. As class ended and students filed out, Maya sat for a moment longer at her chair. Tomorrow, she would go to her basement practice room and work twice as hard as anyone else. She would prove that she belonged here, even if it meant doing it completely on her own. The announcement came on a Tuesday morning, 3 weeks into Maya's first semester. Students were buzzing with excitement in the dining hall, their voices mixing together in a symphony of anticipation that Maya could hear from across the room. Did you hear? Olivia rushed over to Maya's table, practically vibrating with energy. Victoria Sterling is coming here as our new artist-in-residence. Maya nearly choked on her coffee. Victoria Sterling? The Victoria Sterling? The one and only, Olivia said, sliding into the seat across from her. She's going to be teaching master classes and working with select students. This is huge, Maya, like career-changing huge. Maya had grown up listening to Victoria Sterling's recordings. The woman was a legend. Her performances of Chopin were considered some of the finest ever recorded. She had played with every major orchestra in the world and won every competition worth winning. But Maya also knew Sterling's reputation for being difficult. Isn't she the one who made that student cry at Carnegie Hall? Maya asked quietly. That was years ago, Olivia said, waving her hand dismissively. Besides, that student wasn't prepared. Sterling just has high standards, really high standards. Over the next few days, the entire conservatory seemed to transform. Students practiced longer hours, hoping to catch Sterling's attention. The competition that was already fierce among students became almost cutthroat. Practice rooms that were usually available became impossible to book as everyone tried to perfect their repertoire. Maya felt the change too. In her basement practice room, she could hear the intensity above her. Students were staying until midnight, playing the same passages over and over again. She pushed herself harder as well, working on a piece by Rachmaninoff that she had been saving for when she felt ready for a real challenge. The day Sterling arrived, Maya could feel the electricity in the air. She was walking to her morning theory class when she heard a commotion near the main entrance. Students were gathering, trying to get a glimpse of the famous pianist. Maya found herself swept along with the crowd. She could hear the clicking of expensive heels on marble floors, the rustle of what sounded like silk clothing, and the confident way Sterling's footsteps echoed through the hallway. Even her walk sounded accomplished. "She's smaller than I imagined." Someone whispered, "But look at those hands. They're perfect." "I heard she's only going to work with the most advanced students." Maya tried to get closer, curious about this woman whose recordings had inspired her for years. But as she moved through the crowd, someone bumped into her and she stumbled slightly, her cane clattering against the floor. "Watch it," a voice said irritably. Maya bent down to pick up her cane, feeling embarrassed as students stepped around her. When she stood back up, she realized the crowd had grown quiet. Very quiet, a voice cut through the silence like a blade. It was crisp, precise, and carried just a hint of an accent that spoke of European training. "What exactly is this?" Maya felt every eye in the hallway turn toward her. She couldn't see the woman speaking, but she knew instinctively that it was Sterling. "I asked a question," Sterling continued, her voice closer now. "What is this?" "I'm sorry," Maya said, her voice smaller than she intended. "I was just trying to get through." "Trying to get through?" Sterling repeated. There was something in her tone that made Maya's stomach tighten. "And you thought the best way to do that was to disrupt everyone around you?" Maya felt her cheeks burning. "I didn't mean to cause any trouble. I was just what? Looking for attention?" Sterling's voice was sharp enough to cut glass. "Or perhaps you're lost. The community college is several miles down the road." Few students snickered nervously. Maya felt like she was shrinking into herself. This was not how she had imagined meeting one of her musical heroes. "I'm actually a student here," Maya said, trying to keep her voice steady. "First year, piano performance." There was a pause that seemed to last forever. Maya could hear Sterling moving closer, the soft sound of expensive fabric rustling. "A student," Sterling repeated, and Maya could hear the disbelief in her voice. "Piano performance." "Yes, ma'am." Another pause. Then Sterling spoke again, but this time she wasn't addressing Maya. Her voice carried clearly across the hallway, meant for everyone to hear. "I see the conservatory has decided to embrace a more charitable approach to admissions these days." The words hit Maya like a physical blow. She heard several students gasp, and someone whispered, "Oh my God, she didn't just say that." But Sterling wasn't finished. "I do hope the board understands that lowering standards in the name of diversity doesn't actually help anyone. Least of all the students who find themselves in situations they're not equipped to handle." Maya felt tears stinging her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. "Not here, not in front of everyone." She gripped her cane tighter and forced herself to stand straighter. "Excuse me," she said quietly and started to walk away. "That's probably for the best," Sterling called after her. Maya walked as quickly as she could without running, her face burning with humiliation. Behind her, she could hear the crowd beginning to disperse, students whispering excitedly about what they had just witnessed. She made it to her theory classroom and sat in the back row, trying to calm down. Her hands were shaking and she couldn't stop replaying Sterling's words in her head. Charitable approach? Lowering standards? Not equipped to handle dot during class, Maya couldn't concentrate. Professor Chung was explaining chord progressions, but all Maya could hear was Sterling's voice cutting through the hallway like a judge delivering a verdict after class. Olivia found her in the hallway. "Maya, I heard what happened," she said softly. "I'm so sorry." Sterling was completely out of line. "Was she, though?" Maya asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Maybe she's right. Maybe I don't belong here." "Don't you dare say that," Olivia said fiercely. "You earned your place here just like everyone else. Sterling doesn't know anything about you or your talent," but Maya wasn't so sure. Sterling was one of the most accomplished pianists in the world. If she thought Maya didn't belong at Hartwell, maybe she was right. The story of the encounter spread through the conservatory like wildfire. By dinner time, everyone seemed to know about it. Some students looked at Maya with pity, others with curiosity, and a few with what seemed like agreement with Sterling's assessment. That evening, Maya sat alone in her basement practice room, staring at the piano keys. For the first time since arriving at Hartwell, she couldn't bring herself to play. Sterling's words kept echoing in her head. Mixing with the doubts that had been growing since her first day, she thought about calling her grandmother, but what would she say? That the famous pianist thought she was a charity case? That maybe everyone was right to question whether she belonged here? Instead, Maya sat in silence, listening to the sounds of the conservatory above her. Students practicing, perfecting their craft, preparing for lessons with the famous Victoria Sterling. Students who belonged here in a way that Maya was beginning. To think she never would, the next morning brought news that made everything worse. Sterling would be holding auditions for her master class. Only 6 students would be selected to work with her personally. The competition would be fierce, and everyone knew that being chosen could launch a career. Maya watched as her classmates signed up eagerly, already planning what pieces they would perform. She stood at the back of the crowd, invisible and forgotten. "Aren't you going to audition?" Olivia asked when she found Maya later. Maya shook her head. "I don't think that's a good idea." "Why not?" "You're as talented as anyone here." "Sterling made it pretty clear what she thinks of me," Maya said quietly. Olivia was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "You know what I think? I think Sterling is scared." "Scared?" Maya almost laughed. "Of what?" "Of being wrong. Of having to admit that talent comes in forms she doesn't expect." Olivia paused. "My aunt always said that the most closed-minded people are often the most insecure ones." Maya wanted to believe her roommate, but Sterling's words had planted a seed of doubt that was growing stronger every day. As she walked back to her basement practice room, she wondered if maybe it was time to stop fighting so hard to belong. Somewhere she clearly wasn't wanted, above her. She could hear students practicing for their Sterling auditions, their music floating down through the floors like a reminder of everything she might never be allowed to achieve. The grand performance hall at Hartwell Conservatory had never felt more intimidating. Maya sat in the 3rd row, her hands folded carefully in her lap, trying to calm her racing heart. Today was the day of Sterling's first major masterclass. And it wasn't just any ordinary class. This was the event of the semester. The hall was packed with more than just students. Maya could hear the rustle of expensive clothing, the clink of jewelry, and conversations peppered with names of famous orchestras and renowned musicians. These were the conservatory's biggest donors, influential music critics, and industry professionals who could make or break a young musician's career. "I heard the Times critic is here," whispered a student behind Maya. "And Mrs. Blackwood from the Symphony Board?" added another voice. "My professor said she's looking for new talent for next season's youth concerts." Maya felt her stomach tighten. When Sterling had announced this master class, she had specifically requested that it be open to the entire conservatory community. Everyone should see what real musical excellence looks like. She had said during the announcement. Olivia squeezed Maya's arm gently. "You don't have to stay if this gets uncomfortable," she whispered, but Maya shook her head. Part of her was curious to see Sterling work with students, despite everything that had happened. Maybe she could learn something even from a distance. The lights dimmed slightly, and the room fell quiet. Maya heard Sterling's familiar footsteps crossing the stage, each step precise and purposeful. When she spoke, her voice carried effortlessly to every corner of the hall. "Good afternoon, everyone. I'm delighted to be here at Hartwell Conservatory, an institution with such a prestigious reputation." She paused, and Maya could imagine her surveying the audience. "Today, we're going to explore what it truly means to perform at a professional level, the difference between playing notes on a page and creating art." Applause filled the hall. Maya found herself clapping along, despite her complicated feelings about the woman on stage. "I've selected several students to perform today," Sterling continued. "Each represents different aspects of musical development. Some are further along in their journey than others, which will give us an excellent opportunity to discuss standards and expectations." Maya listened as Sterling called the first student to perform. It was David Rodriguez, a 3rd-year student known for his technical brilliance. He played a challenging piece by Liszt with impressive speed and accuracy. Sterling's feedback was detailed and constructive, pointing out subtle interpretive choices that could elevate the performance. The second student was Helen Wu, who played Debussy with delicate beauty. Again, Sterling's comments were helpful and encouraging, praising Helen's artistic maturity while suggesting ways to refine her technique. Maya began to relax slightly. Maybe this wouldn't be so bad? Sterling seemed to be in a good mood, and her teaching was actually quite insightful. Now, Sterling said after Helen finished, I'd like to call up a student who represents a different kind of challenge altogether. Maya felt a chill run down her spine, though she couldn't say why. Maya Jefferson, would you please join me on stage? The words hit Maya like a lightning bolt. She felt every head in the audience turn toward her. Her heart started pounding so hard she was sure everyone could hear it. Go on, Olivia whispered, giving her arm another squeeze. You've got this. Maya stood on shaking legs and made her way to the aisle. Her cane tapped against the floor as she walked, the sound seeming impossibly loud in the quiet hall. She could feel hundreds of eyes watching her every step, could hear the soft murmur of voices as people realized what was happening. The walk to the stage felt like it took forever. Maya climbed the steps carefully, using the railing to guide herself. When she reached the piano, she heard Sterling's voice much closer than before. Miss Jefferson, thank you for joining us. I thought it would be educational for our audience to see how the conservatory is adapting to diverse learning needs. There was something in Sterling's tone that made Maya's stomach drop, but she forced herself to respond politely. Thank you for the opportunity, Miss Sterling. Please have a seat at the piano. I understand you've prepared something for us today. Maya had practiced a piece by Chopin for weeks, one of her favorites that she felt showcased her strengths. But standing here in front of this audience, with Sterling's intimidating presence beside her, she suddenly felt uncertain about everything. She sat down at the bench and adjusted her position. The piano was magnificent, better than anything she had ever played. For a moment, she let her fingers rest on the keys, trying to find her center. Whenever you're ready, Sterling said. But there was an impatience in her voice that hadn't been there with the other students. Maya took a deep breath and began to play. The opening notes of Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major flowed from her fingers, soft and expressive. She had played this piece hundreds of times, and despite her nerves, the familiar melody began to calm her, but as she played, she became aware of the silence in the audience. It wasn't the appreciative silence she had heard during the other performances. This felt different, watchful, critical. She tried to focus on the music, to lose herself in the beautiful harmonies the way she always did. The piece built to its emotional climax, and Maya poured all of her passion into the performance, her fingers dancing across the keys with the confidence that came from years of practice. When the final notes faded away, there was a moment of complete silence. Maya turned toward where she thought Sterling was standing, waiting for feedback. Well, Sterling said finally, her voice cutting through the quiet like ice. That was certainly an attempt. Maya felt her cheeks begin to burn. An attempt? But that wasn't the kind of feedback the other students had received. Tell me, Miss Jefferson, Sterling continued, and Maya could hear her moving closer. How exactly do you plan to navigate the practical realities of a professional musical career? I'm sorry, I don't understand the question, Maya said quietly. Oh, I think you do. Sterling's voice was getting sharper. Let's start with the basics. How do you expect to follow a conductor when you can't see their gestures? How will you manage page turns during longer pieces? What about chamber music, where eye contact and visual cues are essential? Each question felt like a slap. Maya tried to respond. I memorize all my pieces, so page turns aren't an issue. And I've worked with conductors before using audio cues. Audio cues, Sterling repeated, and there was a mocking tone in her voice that made several people in the audience shift uncomfortably. How convenient. And I suppose the rest of the orchestra should adjust their playing to accommodate your limitations? Maya felt tears beginning to form, but she fought them back. She would not cry in front of all these people. I don't expect anyone to accommodate me, she said, trying to keep her voice steady. I just want the chance to prove what? I can do what you can do, Sterling said thoughtfully. Yes, let's talk about that. What you just played was technically adequate, I suppose. But music at this level isn't just about hitting the right notes. It's about communication, about connecting with an audience, about understanding the full scope of musical expression. Sterling paused, and when she spoke again, her voice carried to every corner of the hall. The question we must ask ourselves is whether it's fair to you, to your fellow students, to the integrity of this institution to pretend that good intentions can substitute for the complete skill set required for professional music making. The silence in the hall was deafening. Maya felt like she was drowning in it. She could hear her own heartbeat, could feel the weight of hundreds of pairs of eyes staring at her. Perhaps, Sterling continued, there are other paths that might be more suitable for someone with your particular challenges. Community music programs, for instance. Teaching young children. There's no shame in finding your appropriate level. The words hung in the air like poison. Maya sat frozen at the piano bench, unable to move, unable to speak. She had been publicly dismissed, her dreams crushed in front of the most important people in the music world. Thank you, Miss Jefferson, Sterling said with artificial politeness. You may return to your seat. Somehow, Maya managed to stand. Somehow, she managed to walk across the stage and down the steps without falling. Her legs felt like they were made of water, and her vision, what little awareness she had, seemed to blur around the edges. The walk back to her seat felt like a death march. She could hear whispers starting as she passed, could feel the mixture of pity and embarrassment radiating from the audience. When she finally reached her row, Olivia took her arm and guided her to her seat. Maya sat down and stared straight ahead, her hands clenched in her lap. On stage, Sterling was already calling the next student, moving on as if nothing significant had happened. As if Maya's humiliation was just a brief educational moment before returning to real music. But for Maya, sitting in that audience, everything had changed. The dream that had sustained her through years of practice, through financial struggles, through every challenge she had faced, felt like it was crumbling around her. Sterling's voice continued from the stage, praising the next student's interpretation and technique. The audience responded with enthusiastic applause, but Maya heard none of it. All she could hear were Sterling's words echoing in her head. The morning after the master class, Maya woke up hoping it had all been a terrible dream. But the moment she opened her eyes and remembered where she was, the weight of yesterday's humiliation crashed down on her like a tidal wave. Olivia was already gone, probably at breakfast or an early class. Maya lay in bed for a long time, listening to the sounds of the dormitory coming to life around her. Students talking in the hallways, doors opening and closing, the distant sound of someone practicing scales on a violin. Normal conservatory. Life continuing as if nothing had happened. When Maya finally forced herself to get up and dressed, she discovered that nothing was normal anymore. The moment she stepped into the hallway, conversation stopped. She could feel eyes following her as she walked toward the elevator, and whispers started up the moment she passed. That's her! I still can't believe Sterling did that. Did you see her face? I felt so bad for her. But not all the comments were sympathetic. I mean, Sterling wasn't wrong, though. How is she supposed to perform professionally? It's kind of unfair to the rest of us. The standards should be the same for everyone. I heard she only got in because of diversity quotas. Mayo tried to ignore the voices, but each comment felt like a small knife twisting in her chest. She made it to the dining hall and got in line for breakfast, but even there she could feel the stares. Some students looked at her with pity, others with curiosity, and a few with what seemed like agreement with Sterling's assessment. She sat alone at a small table in the corner, picking at her food without really eating. Across the room, she could see groups of students talking in hushed tones, occasionally glancing in her direction. Maya had never felt more isolated in her life. Her first class of the day was music theory with Professor Chun. Maya usually loved this class, but today she couldn't concentrate. Every time another student answered a question or participated in discussion, Maya wondered if they were thinking about yesterday's humiliation. When Professor Chun called on her to identify a chord progression, Maya stumbled over the answer she would normally give without thinking. "Are you feeling all right, Maya?" Professor Chun asked with genuine concern. "I'm fine," Maya lied, her voice barely above a whisper, but she wasn't fine. Not even close. During the break between classes, Maya overheard a conversation that made her stomach sink even further. "Did you see the video?" one student was saying to another. "What video? Someone filmed the Sterling thing yesterday?" "It's all over social media. People are sharing it everywhere." Maya felt the blood drain from her face. She fumbled for her phone with shaking hands and opened the internet browser. It didn't take long to find what she was looking for. The video was on multiple platforms, with titles like "Famous Pianist Destroys Student" and "Blind Girl Gets Reality Check at Music School." The comments section was a nightmare. Maya scrolled through them with growing horror. Sterling was just being honest. Music isn't a participation trophy activity. This girl clearly doesn't belong at that level. Sterling did her a favor. Why? Are schools lowering standards just to be inclusive? This is embarrassing, but there were some supportive comments too. "This is so cruel. That poor girl was actually playing beautifully." "Sterling is a bully. There was no reason to humiliate her like that. I'm blind and I've been playing piano for 20 years. This makes me sick." Maya closed her phone and ran to the nearest bathroom, where she locked herself in a stall and cried. Until she had no tears left, the rest of the day passed in a blur of shame and isolation. Maya went to her classes, but she might as well have been invisible. She spoke to no one, and no one spoke to her. Even Olivia seemed to be giving her space, though Maya wasn't sure if that was kindness or awkwardness. That evening, Maya retreated to her basement practice room earlier than usual. She needed to be somewhere quiet, somewhere she could think. But as she sat down at the piano, she realized she wasn't alone. She could hear voices coming from the hallway outside her room. "I wonder if she's in there," someone was saying. "Probably. I heard she's been practicing like crazy since yesterday." "Can you blame her?" "If Sterling humiliated me like that, I'd either quit or practice until my fingers bled." Maya sat perfectly still, hoping they would go away. But then she heard something that made her blood run cold. "Did you hear what Tyler did? He's been recording her practice sessions through the door and posting them online." "No way, that's so messed up." "I know, right? But they're getting tons of views." "He's calling them the Blind Piano Girl Chronicles or something disgusting like that." Maya felt sick. Someone had been secretly recording her most private moments, the times when she poured her heart into her music, when she worked through her emotions and struggles. And now those moments were entertainment for strangers on the internet. She pulled out her phone again and searched until she found Tyler's social media accounts. There they were. Videos of her practicing, taken through the crack under her door, or through the small window. The audio wasn't great, but it was clear enough. And the comments were even worse than the ones on the masterclass video. At least she can't see how bad she is. This is what happens when feelings matter more than talent. Someone should tell her to find a new hobby. Maya turned off her phone and sat in the dark practice room, feeling more alone than she had ever felt in her life. Above her, she could hear other students practicing normally, their lives unchanged by what had happened to her. They were probably preparing for their next lessons, their next performances, their bright futures in music, but Maya felt like her future had been ripped away from her. She tried to play, thinking music might help her feel better the way it always had, but her hands were shaking and she kept making mistakes in pieces she had known perfectly for years. Every wrong note felt like proof that Sterling had been right about her. Her phone buzzed with a text message from her grandmother Ruby. "Haven't heard from you in a few days, sweetheart. Just wanted to check in and see how you're doing. Call me when you get a chance. Love you." Maya stared at the message for a long time. How could she possibly explain what had happened? How could she tell her grandmother that the dream they had worked so hard for was falling apart? That maybe she really didn't belong here after all? She turned off her phone without responding. For the next week, Maya's life became a pattern of isolation and obsessive practice. She skipped most meals, avoiding the dining hall where students would stare and whisper. She went to classes but spoke to no one. She spent 12 to 14 hours a day in her practice room, working on the same pieces over and over again, trying to make them perfect enough to prove Sterling wrong, but nothing felt good enough. Every time she played, she could hear Sterling's voice in her head, pointing out flaws and limitations. The music that had once been her greatest joy became a source of frustration and self-doubt. Her phone rang several times each day. Grandmother Ruby worried about the silence. Maya let every call go to voicemail. Maya, honey, I'm starting to worry. Please call me back. Sweetheart, it's been 5 days. Just let me know you're okay. Maya, if you don't call me back soon, I'm getting on a bus and coming up there. But Maya couldn't bring herself to pick up the phone. What would she say? That she was failing? That Sterling had been right? That all the sacrifices Ruby had made for her music education had been for nothing? Olivia tried to talk to her several times, but Maya brushed off her roommate's concerns with mumbled responses about being busy with practice. She could see the worry in Olivia's eyes, but she couldn't deal with that either. Late at night, when the conservatory was quiet and she was alone in her basement practice room, Maya would sometimes stop playing and just sit in the darkness. The silence was both comforting and terrifying. In the quiet, she could almost pretend that none of this had happened. But she also knew that when morning came, she would have to face it all again. The worst part wasn't even Sterling's cruelty or the online mockery. The worst part was the growing voice in her own head that whispered maybe they were all right. Maybe she really didn't belong here. Maybe she had been fooling herself all along. As Maya sat alone in her practice room for the 7th night in a row, her phone buzzed with another message from Ruby. I love you no matter what, baby girl. Whatever is happening, we can get through it together, but you have to let me help you. Maya read the message 3 times before turning her phone face down on the piano bench. Above her, the conservatory slept peacefully, full of students who had never doubted their right to be there, but Maya sat awake in the basement, playing the same pieces over and over again, searching for something she was beginning to fear she might never find. Maya had been avoiding her dorm room for 2 weeks, returning only late at night when she was sure Olivia would be asleep. But on this particular Thursday evening, her roommate was waiting for her, sitting on her bed with her arms crossed and a determined look on her face. We need to talk, Olivia said the moment Maya walked through the door. Maya froze, her hand still on the doorknob. I'm really tired, Olivia. Can we do this another time? No, we can't. Olivia stood up and walked over to Maya, gently taking the cane from her hand and guiding her to sit on her own bed. Maya, you're scaring me. You're scaring everyone who cares about you. I'm fine, Maya said automatically, the same lie she had been telling herself for weeks. You're not fine. You haven't eaten a real meal in days. You're spending 16 hours a day in that basement room. You won't answer your grandmother's calls? And when you do come back here, you look like you've been crying. Maya felt her throat tighten. She had been crying almost every day. But she didn't want to admit how broken she felt. Look, I know what Sterling did was awful, Olivia continued. But you can't let her destroy you like this. This isn't who you are. Maybe it is who I am, Maya said quietly. Maybe Sterling was. Right, maybe I don't belong here. Olivia was quiet for a moment. Then she did something unexpected. She walked over to her desk and picked up her laptop. I want to show you something, she said, sitting down next to Maya on the bed. Actually, I want you to hear something. She opened her laptop and clicked on a video. Beautiful piano music filled the room, complex and passionate and absolutely stunning. Who is that? Maya asked, despite herself. That's Art Tatum. He was one of the greatest jazz pianists who ever lived. He was also nearly blind. Maya listened as the music danced and swirled, Tatum's fingers finding notes and combinations. That seemed impossible. Here's another one, Olivia said, clicking on a different video. This time, it was a classical piece played with incredible precision and emotion. That's Nobuyuki Tsuji. He's won major international competitions, performed with the world's best orchestras, and recorded with prestigious labels. He was born completely blind. Olivia played another recording. This is Derek Paravicini. He's a savant pianist who's been blind since birth. And this, she clicked again, is Rachel Flowers. She's composed symphonies and performed all over the world. Maya listened to each recording with growing amazement. These weren't just competent musicians making the best of their limitations. These were extraordinary artists who happened to be blind. "Why are you showing me this?" Maya asked. "Because I want you to remember something you seem to have forgotten. Being blind doesn't make you less of a musician. It makes you a different kind of musician. And sometimes different is exactly what the world needs." Olivia closed the laptop and turned to face Maya directly. "There's something else I need to tell you. You think everyone at this school agrees with Sterling, but you're wrong. I've heard the whispers, Olivia. I've seen the videos online." "Have you also seen the petition?" Maya looked confused. "What petition?" Olivia pulled out her phone and opened an app. Diego Martinez started it the day after Sterling's masterclass. It's calling for the conservatory to formally censure Sterling for unprofessional conduct. It already has over 300 signatures from students, faculty, and alumni. Maya felt her heart skip. 300? That's not all. Professor Williams, your theory teacher, has been asking about you every day. He wants to know if you're okay. And Mrs. Patterson in the office has been fielding calls from music teachers all over the country who saw the video and want to support you. Olivia scrolled through her phone. Listen to this. This is a message from Dr. Jennifer Park, the head of piano studies at Berkeley. She wrote, "I was disgusted by what I witnessed in that video. That young woman has extraordinary musical sensitivity, and she deserves much better than the treatment she received. If she ever wants to transfer, she would be welcome here with open arms." Maya felt tears forming in her eyes, but for the first time in weeks, they weren't tears of despair. "And this," Olivia continued, "is from James Thompson, the principal pianist for the Chicago Symphony. He said, 'I've been following this story, and I want that brave young woman to know that real musicians judge talent by what comes out of the piano, not by who's sitting at the bench.'" Maya was quiet for a long time, processing everything Olivia had told her. Finally, she spoke. "Why didn't you tell me this before?" "Because you wouldn't have listened. You were so deep in your own pain that you couldn't hear anything else. I needed you to be ready to hear it." Olivia was right. 2 weeks ago, Maya wouldn't have believed any of this. She would have assumed people were just being polite or feeling sorry for her. "But there's something even more important I need to tell you," Olivia said. "You've been trying so hard to prove that you can play like everyone else that you've forgotten what made you special in the first place." "What do you mean?" "I mean the way you played that first day in Professor Williams' class, before Sterling got in your head. You weren't trying to impress anyone or prove anything. You were just being yourself, and it was beautiful." Maya thought back to that day. It felt like a lifetime ago. "Sterling wants you to believe that there's only one way to be a good musician," Olivia continued. "Her way, the traditional classical European way, but that's not true. Music is bigger than that. Music comes from all kinds of places, all kinds of experiences. I don't understand." Olivia stood up and walked to the window. "Tell me about your grandmother's music. The songs she taught you before you ever came here." Maya smiled for the first time in weeks. "Gospel songs. Spirituals, some blues. She used to play them in church, but also just for fun. They were different from classical music. More emotional, maybe, more personal." "When's the last time you played one of those songs?" Maya thought about it. "I don't know, months maybe. Since I've been here, I've only been working on classical pieces." "Why?" "Because that's what you're supposed to play at a conservatory. That's what real musicians play." "According to who? Sterling?" Maya was quiet. Olivia was right. She had been so focused on fitting in, on proving she could play the music everyone else was playing, that she had abandoned the music that was truly hers. "I have an idea," Olivia said suddenly. "What if you stopped trying to play like everyone else and started playing like Maya Jefferson?" "I don't know what that means." It means combining everything you are into your music. The classical training you've gotten here, the gospel and blues your grandmother taught you. The experiences you've had as a blind person navigating a world that doesn't always understand you. What if you wrote a piece that was completely, authentically you? The idea was terrifying and exciting at the same time. Maya had never composed her own music before. She had always played other people's pieces, trying to interpret them correctly, trying to match what was expected. I wouldn't even know where to start, Maya said. Start with what you feel. Start with your story. Start with the music that lives in your heart when nobody else is listening. That night, Maya called her grandmother Ruby for the first time in 2 weeks. Ruby answered on the first ring. Maya, baby, I've been so worried about you. I know, Grandma. I'm sorry. Things have been ... hard. Maya told Ruby everything. About Sterling's humiliation, about the videos, about the cruel comments and her spiral into isolation. Ruby listened without interrupting, making small sounds of understanding and sympathy. That woman doesn't know what she's talking about, Ruby said when Maya finished. But more importantly, you can't let her voice become louder than your own. What do you mean? I mean, you've been given a gift, Maya. Not just your musical talent, but your whole experience. The way you hear the world, the way you feel music, the songs that raised you up in my living room, that's your voice. And the world needs to hear it. The next day, Maya went to her basement practice room with a different purpose. Instead of practicing the same classical pieces over and over, she sat quietly at the piano and thought about everything Ruby had said. She thought about the gospel songs her grandmother had taught her, the way they made her feel connected to something bigger than herself. She started with just a few notes, simple melody like the beginning of an old spiritual, but then she added harmonies she had learned in her theory classes. She took the rhythm of a blues song Ruby used to hum while cooking and wove it together with the structure of a classical sonata for the first time in weeks. Maya wasn't trying to prove anything to anyone. She was just making music that felt true to who she was. The piece was rough, just a beginning. But as her fingers moved across the keys, combining the traditional with the contemporary, the sacred with the academic, Maya felt something she hadn't felt since arriving at Hartwell. She felt like herself again. Above her, the conservatory continued its daily routine. But in the basement, Maya Jefferson was finally finding her voice. The annual Hartwell Conservatory Gala was the most important event of the year. Maya could feel the electricity in the air as she walked through the conservatory halls that evening, wearing the one nice dress she owned that Ruby had bought her for graduation from high school. The building buzzed with activity as wealthy donors, famous musicians, and influential critics gathered for an evening of exceptional performances by the school's most talented students. Maya hadn't planned to attend. For weeks, she had been working on her original composition in the quiet of her basement practice room, slowly building something that felt uniquely hers. She had made progress, but the piece still felt unfinished, like she was searching for something she couldn't quite name, but Olivia had insisted. You need to be there, she had said firmly while helping Maya pick out what to wear. Not to perform, just to be part of the community again, to remember that you belong here. So here Maya was, sitting in the back row of the grand performance hall, listening to her classmates showcase their talents for an audience that could shape their futures. The hall was packed with more distinguished guests than Maya had ever imagined could fit in one room. She heard familiar voices around her. Mrs. Blackwood from the Symphony Board was sitting 3 rows ahead, discussing summer programs with another donor. The music critic from the Times was somewhere to her left, his distinctive laugh echoing through the hall. These were the people who decided which young musicians got opportunities and which ones didn't. The evening's performances had been extraordinary. Helen Wu had played Rachmaninoff with breathtaking beauty. David Rodriguez had performed a Chopin concerto that earned a standing ovation. Each student seemed to surpass the last, and Maya found herself genuinely moved by their artistry. Ladies and gentlemen, the conservatory's director announced from the stage, we're honored to conclude tonight's program with a special performance by our distinguished artist-in-residence, Victoria Sterling, Miss Sterling will be performing. Liszt Transcendental Etude No. 12 in B-flat minor. Chassé Nige. Maya felt her stomach tighten at the mention of Sterling's name. She hadn't seen the famous pianist since that terrible day in the master class, but the memory of that humiliation still felt fresh. The audience applauded as Sterling walked onto the stage in an elegant black gown, her posture perfect and confident. She adjusted the piano bench with the precise movements of someone who had performed on the world's greatest stages. Sterling placed her hands on the keys and began the opening notes of one of Liszt's most challenging pieces. The music was technically perfect, each note crystal clear and precisely placed. Maya could understand why Sterling was considered one of the world's great pianists, but something felt wrong. Maya tilted her head, listening more carefully. The music was flawless, but it felt cold somehow. Beautiful but distant, like looking at a painting through thick glass. About 3 minutes into the piece, during one of the most demanding passages, something happened that no one expected. A jarring discord rang out from the piano, followed by the sound of a key sticking, then another. Sterling's hands faltered as several keys failed to respond properly. The audience shifted uncomfortably as Sterling stopped playing altogether. She tried the problematic keys again, but the sound was clearly wrong. The piano, which had been perfectly tuned for the evening, seemed to have developed a serious mechanical problem. "Ladies and gentlemen," Sterling said into the sudden quiet, her voice tight with frustration, "it appears we have a technical difficulty. Perhaps we should take a brief intermission while this is addressed." The conservatory's director rushed onto the stage along with 2 piano technicians. Maya could hear them speaking in hushed, urgent tones as they examined the instrument. Several keys were completely non-responsive, and others were producing distorted sounds. "This is going to take at least 30 minutes to fix," one of the technicians said loudly enough for the audience to hear. "Maybe longer," the audience began to murmur with disappointment. Many of these donors had come specifically to hear Sterling perform. The director looked genuinely distressed as he considered how to salvage the evening's conclusion. Maya sat in her back row seat, listening to the chaos on stage and the growing restlessness in the audience. An idea began forming in her mind, crazy and terrifying and completely unlike anything she had ever considered doing, her original composition. The piece she had been working on for weeks, the one that blended everything she was into something uniquely hers. She knew it by heart now, had played it so many times in her basement room that it lived in her fingers. It wasn't finished, not perfect, but it was real, it was true. "I have to do this," she whispered to herself. Olivia, who was sitting beside her, heard her. "Do what?" "I have to play." "Maya, what are you talking about? This isn't a student event." These people came to hear Sterling. But Maya was already standing up. "That's exactly why I have to do this." Before Olivia could stop her, before she could talk herself out of it, Maya was walking toward the stage. Her cane tapped against the floor as she moved down the aisle. And slowly, the audience began to notice her approach. Conversations stopped. Heads turned. Maya could feel hundreds of pairs of eyes watching her as she made her way to the front of the hall. "Excuse me," she called out as she reached the edge of the stage. "May I make a suggestion?" The conservatory director looked down at her with confusion. "Miss Jefferson, what are you doing?" Maya's heart was pounding so hard she was sure everyone could hear it, but her voice was steady when she spoke. "While you're fixing the piano, perhaps I could play something on the second piano?" She gestured toward a smaller grand piano that sat off to the side of the stage, used for accompanying singers and small ensemble pieces. Sterling, who had been standing near the problematic piano, looking frustrated and impatient, turned toward Maya with an expression of disbelief. "That's hardly appropriate. These guests came to hear professional-level performance." "With respect, Miss Sterling," Maya said, her voice carrying clearly through the now silent hall, "music is music. And right now, these people came to hear music." The director looked uncertain. The audience was watching this exchange with fascination. Maya could sense the tension building as everyone waited to see what would happen. Then, from somewhere in the middle of the audience, a voice called out. "Let her play." Maya recognized the voice. It was Diego Martinez, the student who had started the petition supporting her weeks ago. "Yes, let her play," called another voice. Then another. Soon, scattered applause was building throughout the hall. Not everyone was clapping, but enough people were that the director found himself in an impossible position. Sterling's face was tight with anger. "This is completely inappropriate. I am the featured performer for this evening." But Mrs. Blackwood, from the symphony board, stood up from her seat. "Actually, I'd very much like to hear what Miss Jefferson has prepared. I've been following her story with great interest." That seemed to decide it. The conservatory director nodded reluctantly. "Very well, Miss Jefferson, but please keep it brief." Maya climbed the steps to the stage on shaking legs. This was nothing like the last time she had been up here, when Sterling had called her up to humiliate her. This time she was here by her own choice. About to play her own music, she walked to the smaller piano and sat down at the bench. The hall was completely quiet now, the kind of expectant silence that comes before something important is about to happen. Maya placed her hands on the keys and took a deep breath. This was it. The moment when she would either prove she belonged here or fail in front of everyone who mattered. But as her fingers found the opening notes of her composition, something magical happened. The music that flowed from the piano wasn't the cold, perfect technique of classical training. It wasn't the rigid structure that Sterling valued above all else. It was Maya's story, told in notes and harmonies that spoke of struggle and hope, of finding beauty in darkness and strength in pain. The gospel melodies her grandmother had taught her wove together with the sophisticated harmonies she had learned at Hartwell. The rhythm had the soul of the blues, but the structure of a classical sonata. As she played, Maya felt herself transported. This wasn't about proving anything to Sterling or the critics or even to herself. This was about sharing the music that lived in her heart, the music that connected her to her grandmother's living room and her own journey to this stage. The piece built and flowed, sometimes gentle as a lullaby, sometimes powerful as a storm. Maya poured everything into it, her loneliness, her determination, her love for the music that had sustained her through the darkest moments. And as the final notes rang out into the silence, Maya knew that whatever happened next, she had finally found her voice. As the final notes of Maya's composition faded into the air, something extraordinary happened in the grand performance hall of Hartwell Conservatory. Complete silence. But this wasn't the uncomfortable, awkward silence that had followed Sterling's cutting remarks weeks ago. This was the profound quiet that comes when an audience has been moved so deeply that they need a moment to process what they've just experienced. Maya could feel it in the air around her, thick and electric and full of emotion. She sat at the piano bench with her hands still resting on the keys, her heart pounding as she waited for some kind of response. Seconds felt like hours as the silence stretched on. Maya began to wonder if she had made a terrible mistake. Maybe her music was too different, too personal, too far from what these sophisticated people expected to hear. Then, from somewhere in the middle of the hall, she heard it. The sound of one person clapping slowly, deliberately. Then another person joined in. And another. Within moments, the entire audience was on their feet, applauding with an intensity that Maya had never experienced before. The sound washed over her like a wave, and she felt tears streaming down her face as she realized what was happening. They weren't just being polite. They weren't clapping out of pity or obligation. They were genuinely moved by what she had shared with them. "Bravo!" someone shouted from the balcony. "Magnificent!" called another voice. Maya stood up from the piano bench, still hardly believing what was happening. The applause seemed to go on forever, growing stronger rather than fading. She could hear people whistling, cheering, calling out words of praise and encouragement through the thunderous applause. Maya heard footsteps approaching from behind her. She turned, expecting to find the conservatory director or perhaps a stage manager telling her it was time to leave. Instead, she found herself face to face with Mrs. Blackwood from the symphony board. The older woman's eyes were bright with tears, and she was smiling more widely than Maya had ever seen anyone smile. "My dear," Mrs. Blackwood said, her voice barely audible over the continuing applause. "That was the most authentic piece of music I've heard in years. Where did you learn to compose like that?" I didn't really learn," Maya said, still overwhelmed by the response. "I just played what was in my heart." "Exactly," Mrs. Blackwood said firmly. "That's what real music is supposed to be. Not perfect technique or flawless execution. It's supposed to be truth." The applause was finally beginning to fade, but people remained standing. Maya could hear conversations starting up throughout the hall, excited voices talking about what they had just witnessed. "Miss Jefferson," a man's voice called from the audience. Maya turned toward the sound. "I'm Jonathan Hayes from Lincoln Center. I would very much like to speak with you about performing this piece in our Emerging Artists series." "And I'm Rebecca Torres from the International Young Musicians Competition," called another voice. "We would love to have you audition for our next program." Maya felt dizzy as more voices joined in, music professionals offering opportunities she had only dreamed. Oh. Recording companies, concert halls, music festivals, it seemed like everyone in the audience wanted to talk to her, but there was one voice that had been conspicuously quiet throughout all of this. Maya turned toward where she knew Sterling was. Standing near the main piano, which the technicians were still working on, Sterling hadn't applauded. She hadn't moved. Maya could sense her presence like a storm cloud, dark and complicated and impossible to ignore. The audience was beginning to settle back into their seats, but the energy in the room remained electric. The conservatory director approached the microphone at the center of the stage. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, his voice full of pride, "I think we can all agree that we've witnessed something very special tonight. Miss Jefferson, on behalf of the entire conservatory community, thank you for that extraordinary performance." More applause erupted, though not as sustained as before. Maya nodded gratefully and started to make her way toward the steps at the side of the stage. She wanted to get back to her seat to process what had just happened, to figure out if this was real or if she was dreaming, but as she reached the edge of the stage, Sterling's voice cut through the noise. "Miss Jefferson, a moment, please." Maya froze. The last thing she wanted was another confrontation with Sterling, especially not here, not now, after everything that had just happened, but she couldn't pretend she hadn't heard. Slowly, she turned back toward the famous pianist. Sterling had moved away from the broken piano and was walking toward Maya. Her expression was unreadable, but something in her posture seemed different than it had been before. The audience had noticed the interaction and was watching with intense curiosity. Conversations died down as people strained to hear what would happen next. Sterling stopped about 3 feet away from Maya for a long moment. The two women stood facing each other, in silence. Maya could feel her heart racing again, but this time it wasn't from performance nerves. It was from the uncertainty of not knowing what Sterling was about to say. When Sterling finally spoke, her voice was quiet enough that only Maya and the people in the first few rows could hear her. "I owe you an apology," she said. Maya blinked in surprise. She had expected criticism, judgment, perhaps another attempt to put her in her place. An apology was the last thing she had anticipated. "I was wrong," Sterling continued, her voice growing slightly stronger. "Not just about your abilities, but about what music should be. What I heard tonight, She paused, seeming to struggle. "Oh, words. What you played tonight was what I've been searching for my entire career without even realizing it." Maya didn't know what to say. This was so far from anything she had imagined that she felt like she might be having some kind of surreal dream. "I've spent 40 years perfecting technique," Sterling said. 40 years chasing flawless execution and critical acclaim. But I've forgotten how to make music speak to people's hearts. You reminded me what that sounds like." The audience was completely quiet now, hanging on every word. Maya could sense that this was as shocking to them as it was to her. "I was threatened by you," Sterling admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "By your talent, by your authenticity, by the way you make music seem effortless and natural when I have to work so hard for every note. I responded to that threat in the most unprofessional way possible, and I am deeply sorry." Maya felt tears starting in her eyes again. Miss Sterling, Please, Sterling interrupted. Let me finish. I've been thinking about our first encounter every day since it happened. I've been telling myself that I was maintaining standards, that I was being honest about the challenges you would face. But the truth is, I was just being cruel. Sterling looked out at the audience, then back at Maya. What you played tonight has more soul and honesty than anything I've performed in years, and I was wondering, ... She paused, looking almost vulnerable. I was wondering if you might be willing to teach me. The request hung in the air like something impossible. Victoria Sterling, one of the world's most famous pianists, asking a first-year student to teach her. Teach you what? Maya asked softly. How to find my way back to the music, Sterling said. How to play from the heart instead of just from the head. How to stop being afraid of showing who I really am when I sit down at the piano. Maya looked at this woman who had caused her so much pain, who had nearly destroyed her confidence and her dreams. But all she could see now was another musician who had lost her way, someone who had forgotten why she started playing music in the first place. I would be honored, Maya said simply. The audience erupted in applause again, but this time it felt different. It wasn't just appreciation for a beautiful performance. It was celebration of something deeper, the kind of moment when people witnessed genuine human growth and connection. As the evening wound down and people began to leave, Maya found herself surrounded by music industry professionals, each more enthusiastic than the last about working with her. Business cards and contact information were pressed into her hands. Invitations to auditions, competitions, and performance opportunities came from every direction. But the moment that meant the most to Maya came when she finally made it back to her seat and found Olivia waiting for her with tears in her eyes. I'm so proud of you, Olivia said, hugging her tightly. Not just for the performance, but for having the courage to be yourself. Later that night, Maya sat in her dorm room with her phone in her hands, finally ready to call her grandmother Ruby. She had so much to tell her, so much to share about this incredible evening. Ruby answered on the first ring, as if she had been waiting by the phone. Maya, baby, how are you doing? I'm good, Grandma, Maya said, and for the first time in months, she really meant it. I'm really, really good, and I have so much to tell you. As Maya began to share the story of her evening, the performance, the standing ovation, Sterling's apology, and all the opportunities that had suddenly opened up before her, she realized something important. She had finally found her place at Hartwell Conservatory. Not by changing herself to fit in, but by having the courage to be exactly who she was meant to be, the girl who had arrived here months ago, scared and uncertain and trying so hard to prove she belonged, was gone.